Bitcoin volatility. You talked a little bit before about that there's volatility, but that can work to your advantage. If you're a commodities company, you have instruments to sort of hedge against volatility. I'm guessing that this is so early in the evolution of Bitcoin that you don't have hedging instruments, but that you talked about cyclicality. So is one of your treasury strategies maintaining liquidity to jump in when you see opportunities, or how do you think about opportunistically acquiring Bitcoin?
Yeah, so on the way up, it's much easier because you can just sell equity, you can issue a convertible bond. All financial instruments work better on the way up. On the way down, I think it is more about how you are doing relative to your competitors. In a bear market, you can imagine a situation where some companies are trading significantly below their net asset value. That's an opportunity where accretion might come from different means, such as mergers and acquisitions. And a scenario like that, we just saw one of the first all-stock deals done between two Bitcoin treasury companies in the United States. A company called Strive acquired a company called Similar Scientific. And that was really the first example of one of these acquisitions being done. I expect to see a lot more of them. And our CEO is a former M&A lawyer, so we're well positioned to take advantage of such opportunities should they present themselves.
So M&A could be a very good and accretive way to increase your Bitcoin position. But given the way there's often a very large gap between buyers and sellers, can you give us a little bit more color on that acquisition and where you see the market at this point?
Yeah, for the acquisition to be accretive, really all that is necessary is that the Bitcoin per share of your company is greater than the Bitcoin per share of the other company. Like even if you're trading at a discount, so your company is trading at 0.7 times net asset value, the other company is trading at 0.5. Your company is coming out ahead of that transaction. Ideally, your company is trading at 1 or better, but it's really all about the value on a relative basis.
You mentioned it during your prepared remarks. Is it something you're taking a look at now about potentially growing the Bitcoin position through M&A as well as through acquiring the Bitcoin itself?
Yes, both strategies are on the table. Any particular M&A deal is difficult to comment on, but it's definitely something we are interested in as opportunities present themselves.
So what we should be looking at is the multiple of NAV and not so much the balance sheet of some of these Bitcoin treasury companies, or it goes hand in hand?
It's really both, because market access for products like preferred stocks or convertible bonds or whatever it is you're going to be issuing to a certain extent is driven by the size of your capital base. One of the advantages of operating in Sweden is that I don't think we need to have as large of a capital base to issue some of these instruments. If we were going to be doing preferred stocks in the United States, we'd have to compete with Strategy. They've already got something like $80-90 billion of Bitcoin in the balance sheet. If we're going out to market saying, we've got 1,000 Bitcoin, and we're trying to get creditors to underwrite us, it's a very different picture. But within the Swedish market, I think we can still be competitive with this much smaller capital base. But the Bitcoin per share it's more relevant for other instruments that are directly tied towards equity raising, because with something like a preferred stock, it's not directly tied to the share price. But if you're doing an equity raise, then obviously the Bitcoin per share is going to be important. If your stock is trading at 0.9 times its net asset value, then doing an equity raise makes no sense because you're actually destroying value. But if there's potentially other things you could do, if you could do a convertible bond with a 30% premium, that's going to push you back over 1. Pretty much anything over 1 gives you an operation that you could do creatively, and generally the higher the better.
And you mentioned, that you have the capability to do this with the size of your company being what it is, because you operate in Sweden, not in a larger market. But Bitcoin is a global asset. It's a cross-border asset, digital asset. Do you see any kind of potential for cross-border M&A opportunities?
Potentially. If we got to the point we were going to explore, let's say we wanted to move up and do like a NASDAQ listing in the United States, potential route to that might be doing a merger with a U.S. company. That's still a ways off in the future, and we're very happy on OTC right now. But if we were to pursue that path, M&A is a quicker path to getting listed than doing starting from scratch.
Okay, I have one last question, and then I'm going to open it to the audience. And by the way, I'm guessing there's a lot of interest in Bitcoin because this is the last presentation and you still have, a good amount of people here who, want to get to the bar soon. So in terms of, I'm not asking you to name names, but Bitcoin, being a buzzword, crypto being a buzzword, we all know, that Trump talked a lot about crypto. Do you see a lot of recent market entrants that don't seem to have a coherent, cohesive strategy? Again, not asking you to name names.
Yeah, so when, it's a common question, people always say, what should I look for in a Bitcoin treasury company? And especially with so many that come to market recently, the two things I always tell people are look for companies that are owned by Bitcoiners. One of the things I always say, it takes 4 years to meet the Bitcoiner. You kind of have to have lived through the volatility. You have to have confidence that the management is going to stick with the companies with volatility. Because the last thing you want is to be invested in a company that says they're running a Bitcoin strategy. And then the first sign of the downside of the volatility, the company says, oh, you know what, maybe we're not selling to Bitcoin after all. That's not a good situation for anybody. So companies run by Bitcoiners, management teams that you sure are actually going to stick with the strategy and be committed to it. Because it's not just a short-term play. We think it's a 10 to 20-year play. Really, what does the transition to a, more of what would look like more of a traditional financial institution look like? Right now the opportunity is arbitraging credit markets. Bitcoin CAGR is not going to be so much higher than interest rates. This type of business model lasts forever. People always say arbitrage is closed. Okay, yes, they close, but what's the time frame? We think this is probably a 10 to 20-year arbitrage. And when that closes, there's going to be new use cases that come online. But right now, you really can't do consumer lending with Bitcoin because if you're actually do a loan denominated in Bitcoin, whoever borrows that has to be able to have a use case for it that returns not only the performance of Bitcoin, but say 5% on top of that. But the meme that I always was fond of says equals MC squared plus 5%. So you have to have that kind of performance for that to make sense. But if you get to a point where say Bitcoin appreciation is only 5% per year, probably over time it trends in line with the growth rate of the economy. And that's when you start seeing other use cases like, say, consumer lending. A lot of interbank lending right now happens through repurchase agreements with treasuries. That could be all these companies like us could be, Bitcoin could be the collateral of future repurchase lending agreements. And companies that have the most Bitcoin are going to be in the best position to do that. And as Bitcoin becomes more integrated into the financial system, then there are going to be probably even more use cases that we haven't even thought of yet, haven't been invented yet. So we're very much looking forward to positioning ourselves not just for the arbitrage now, but for all these opportunities that are going to come later that we can deploy our Bitcoin for.
Thank you. And I see Bitcoin Treasury Capital nodding at a lot of this. Joe, next year, what we have to do is have to have a panel.
Yeah, we will definitely have to. Maybe we'll have a whole day full of.
I'm not so sure, but okay.
Fair enough.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.